I was looking through family research, found this interesting little booklet, and at the very end, I came across this letter your grandpa had written. So I decided to read it, embellish on it, and add pictures. I think he wrote it when he was in his 70s. He wrote, "My grandparents on my mom's side were Jack and Maud Goebel. They had 6 children, which would be Grandpa Tom's aunts and uncles. They were 1 boy and 6 girls, Johnny, the motorcycle cop, his mom, Geneva, Nellie, Lucille, Maudie, Evelyn, and a twin sister to Evelyn who died at birth." Since he skips around a little bit, I'm going to insert pictures of the family tree, which will help explain the relationship. He wrote, "They, meaning the aunts and uncles, all passed away in that order, oldest on down to the youngest. My grandpa was always big and heavy, and Grandma was very sick at times. She had rheumatoid arthritis and was in bed the last 15 years of her life. She passed away when I was in the Marines. I didn't get a furlough for it." Grandpa Tom was about 23 when he joined the service, so his grandma was sick in bed for most of his life at that point. Our records show that she died in 1943. Then he writes, "Grandpa died before Grandma. They were living separate from one another due to his losing his job, which caused them to break up housekeeping. Each one lived with one of their children. The children took turns. Times were really bad. They said Grandpa was really jolly, which I remember, but also was pretty strict. I think they were both in their 60s when they passed away." Now he talks about his parents, Thomas and Geneva. He wrote, "My mom and dad were both 68 when it happened. Dad first, then Mom 5 months later. Dad had lost half of his eyesight from coughing so much, caused by his smoking from 16 years of age and on. Then he had a stroke when Kennedy was killed. The stroke lasted 5 years. Then he passed away, February 5, 1967. Mom died July 9, 1967. Now we go to his grandparents on his dad's side, which would make them my children's great-great-grandparents. They were George Gillette and Sarah Scott Purnell." He writes, "The grandparents on my dad's side were quite different. I didn't know my grandpa George at all, except that he was from Urbana, Illinois. He met my grandma Sarah in Champaign in 1893, after she had been divorced. Her story is an interesting one. I'll write what he writes and continues to embellish a bit. Sarah's first husband was Samuel Purnell. George W. Gillette was born in 1860. He was a civil engineer. He married my grandma Sarah, who had a twin sister, Kate. They looked like twins too. He passed away about 1924, only 10 years after they were married. He died in a hotel room. That was about all Grandpa Tom said about his grandpa, but I read somebody wrote him a letter, and I believe that Grandpa George W. Gillette was a drinker. Now he writes about Sarah. I remember my grandma as a sweet, gentle person with light red hair. Didn't see much of her. I was about 10 or 11 years old when I saw her last. She lived out of town due to the 2 marriages, and she died in 1934 from a broken heart, so my dad and his sister said. The clipping enclosed will explain this. He says, read between the lines. The clipping said, and I'll paraphrase, the romance of the Purnells began in Champaign, Illinois, where they were reared. They lived together for 10 years. Then the romance began to fade despite their 2 children, Charles and Nellie. They divorced in 1893. Sarah remained in Champaign and later married Thomas Gillette. In 1929, Sarah's second husband died, so Sarah moved in with her daughter from her second marriage. Sarah had lived in St. Louis with Tom Gillette, and Samuel Purnell had moved to Iowa, served in the military, and remarried. In 1902, Purnell had moved to Montana, where he prospered and even was elected to the state legislature. After his wife died, he became lonely and wanted someone to share his life with. He thought of the past, and his dreams went to his youth and memories of Sarah. He found out where she lived through her children and wrote her a letter. He wished to renew their relationship after 36 years of being apart. Sarah paid no attention to the letter. Purnell wrote, "You see, I knew through our children that she needed her own home, for she was living with her daughter, and I needed her, so I kept on." Sarah made Purnell court her all over again, and then she consented to marry him again. Samuel Purnell came to St. Louis, and he and Sarah were married in West Park Baptist Church. They enjoyed a honeymoon with the children of their first marriage and made their home in Montana. I looked up Sarah and why she would have died of a broken heart, and I saw that Samuel Purnell died in 1954, 20 years after her. So I'm thinking the marriage the second time around was not a happy one either. She died 5 years after she remarried Purnell. Then Grandpa goes on with his story. He wrote, "My dad had a sister, Jan, who married Elmer Smith. They had 2 children, Lois Jane and Charles, my cousins. We used to visit them when we were small. We went to Lois Jane's wedding after the war. That was the last time I saw them. My uncle killed himself, and I'm assuming here that it was Aunt Jan's husband, Elmer. Or is it Aunt Jane? I don't know. I've got Aunt Jan. He gassed himself in the car in the garage. His son Charles, Grandpa Tom's cousin, hanged himself one day before he received notice of a job he had applied for. He had been despondent. They were very wealthy people from University City, West County. He was a stockbroker. Grandpa Tom had half-cousins due to his grandma Sarah's first marriage to Samuel Purnell. He writes, I have half-cousins due to the marriages my grandma had. We finally got to meet them when my dad, on Mother's Day in 1962, went to Mahomet, Illinois for a reunion. They haven't kept in touch for a long time. My sister and I were there on the farm in the middle 1920s. We were about 5 or 6 years old and have pictures somewhere. I took movies at the reunion of Dad's half-sisters and brother, and also his sister-in-law, Nell Purnell, and her brother, Charles. He wasn't living at the time. Grandpa writes about Charles Purnell. He is the one who took Dad's share of the money when he left home to start a life on a farm in Urbana, Illinois. He was older and never paid it back. Over the years, he made a lot of money and had properties of value and the page is cut off here, but I'm pretty sure he says in the stock market. My half-cousins, Louise, Isabel, Nellie, and Charles, are well off due to what took place years ago. Charles taking Dad's share of the money that was left for him by his mother. Ruth and I visit, that's Grandpa Tom talking, Louise and Isabel every once in a while in Mahomet since 1984. They always write us and ask us to come for a visit. They are nice people, and at that time they were about 83. That's all he wrote at that time, but I believe he wrote more later in his life. It may have been read at his funeral. I'll check. I will also make a video on how are you related to King Camp Gillette, the Razor King. Should you expect to be named in any of the wills? Stay tuned for the next videos. Bye.